Welcome to the Talking HealthTech podcast. My name is Peter Birch. Today I'm joined by Kai Van Lieshout, co-founder and CEO of Lyrebird Health. G'day, Kai. How are you going?
I'm doing great, thanks, Pete. How are you?
Really good, man. I'm super excited to talk about what's probably one of the hottest topics in primary care. In fact, probably all of healthcare at the moment, and AI scribes. And there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of decisions to make, and there's a lot of clinicians just diving in and using these things. Last time you and I spoke, Kai, we were in an office, and it was about 12 months ago, actually, out on the podcast. And it was a conversation with both Lyrebird and best practice software. And we were talking about, this rise and the increase in interest and excitement around artificial intelligence in primary care and the role it plays and all of that. But look, a lot's happened in this space in 12 months. And like I said, the concept of an AI scribe is really front of mind to a lot of clinicians. And if it's not, it probably needs to be up there on the priority list to at least assess and work out where people sit with it. But firstly, I might get you to help us set the scene a little bit. People can dive back into episode 431 for those keeping score from that prior episode for a bit more background about Lyrebird and how everything came about. But look, the AI scribe space, what is it? What's it for? Why is it important?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Pete. And, why is it so hot? I think what we're seeing is that, clinicians are just extremely burnt out in general. I think that's not something like a novel concept, but like the amount of paperwork they've had to do over time has subtly been creeping up as well. And it's kind of hit this tipping point where you're seeing the average doctor's working less and less as a fraction of an FTE for obvious reasons. And then AI has kind of come out, AI scribes have come out, and all of a sudden this massive pain point of 2 to 3 hours a day of paperwork for certain clinicians, they're reducing it to less than 30 minutes by using an AI scribe. And it's kind of, what we're seeing is that people are retiring 5 years later. I got a few emails saying that of people who've used Lyrebird. So it's clearly having this massive impact on people because of, I think, like the pain point it's solving, whereby basically by transcribing a consultation, these scribes in their most basic form will then generate notes, documents, and the clinical admin that used to take hours per day.
That's super cool. And look, I know from my own experience too, the amount of, even in a non-clinical environment, the ability to, I guess, hand off some of the note-taking capability. I get that. Did you say the clinicians are retiring 5 years later though?
Correct. Yeah. So, people who are kind of at their wits' end, they're very exhausted, retire maybe let's like 60, 65, the AI scribe will come in, and as their job actually goes back to just being a deliverer of care, and they're not having to do this paperwork, they can now do it for like an extra 5 years is what we're seeing.
Yeah, right. Like doing it for the reasons that they became a clinician in the first place.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. I see. And so Lyrebird Health, for those unfamiliar, tell us a bit about like what you're building around that.
Yeah. So we, I've got an initial product was the Scribe, but we are building from that to automate essentially any point that a clinician would have to touch their keyboard, their mouse, or interact with the computer. And so, that we started with notes and documents, but now we're automating entire workflows. So like a great example of this, and you had us on with Best Practice and Danielle last time, but we have our integrated mental health care plan workflow with BP. And so that takes roughly an 85-click process of doing a mental health care plan for a GP and turns it to a 5-click process and cuts the paperwork down by over 90%. So beyond just one set of notes or documents to actually doing an entire set of Medicare workflow for a clinician.
Look, I think you've hit on a question that's been in the back of my mind for a little bit around this AI scribe space, because we're seeing more and more companies, I guess, spinning up to present, here's our AI scribe solution. But I'd love to hear from you, Kai. Do you think that an AI scribe is just a feature, or is it a full-blown product?
That's a good question. I think the AI scribe itself will probably become a feature, but I think off the scribe and off that transcript in real time, there's a window of opportunity to turn that into a full-blown product, essentially, right? And so if you think about reimagining the way that clinicians almost interact with their documentation and interact with their computers, that will start to become like a primary product alongside, the same way Hot Docs started. And in a health engine, there was a booking platform, but they're not booking platforms, they're patient experience platforms now, and they managed to turn the booking experience into the the entire patient experience product.
Yeah. No, I that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess if I put my feet in the shoes of a clinician though right now, and they go, cool, I got it. I write a lot of notes at the moment. I hear my colleagues talk about how their AI scribe has saved them hours of time, as you kind of pointed out before. There's a lot of options out there. And is it kind of like pick one and you're kind of good to go, and it doesn't really matter which one? Like, how do you even differentiate between all the different options that you've got out there?
Completely. It's super technical, and it's kind of hard and intimidating if you're a clinician and you just want to save time. You don't really care who you use. It's a bit noisy. So I think the first thing that any clinician is going to want to look at is the data sovereignty and the medico-legal implications. So if they're not processing and storing all data in Australia, then you as a clinician are going to have to consent your patient to offshore transfer. Otherwise, you are effectively, without the consent, sharing medical information offshore. And so that's what you just want to make sure from a liability perspective. So storage and processing is entirely in Australia. The second thing you're going to want to look at is around the Australian privacy principles and kind of medico-legally. From a lot of the MDOs, the advice that we get, and we work with a lot of them, is that it's really great to get consent. So in Lyrebird, we have a little pop-up before every consult where a clinician has to click, yes, we've gotten consent to use this, and we just record the fact that the clinician has for their protection as well. And so that's a really key part. And I'd say the third thing is integrations. So like I said, in that turning into a product and not becoming a feature, like being able to have a product and choosing the one that's going to be able to, today it might do your notes, but tomorrow it's going to do entire workflows, fill your PDFs for you, do all of that. That's really important. And so looking for one with really deep integrations too.
Yeah, I want to dive into the integrations piece in a little bit, but I'm just thinking about the practical realities, right? So maybe it's good that I continue to go to a GP who I won't name. However, their digital readiness is probably not at a level that, or their appetite for technology is not super high, and that's fine. I go there, and it's a bit of an old school consultation, and there's a bit of handwriting. He is using a computer a little bit more now, but if there's a clinician, because that patient interaction is super important. But then, if you think about it in reality, for those that don't know, does a GP say at the start of a consult, hey, are you okay if I record this? Or do they have to put a microphone in front of a patient? Or like, what does it change the consult necessarily in using an AI scribe? Or is it something you can just do, on the side there and not make a big deal of it? Because we talk about consent, and we know that patients fill out a thing. Like, what does that front end workflow and I guess actual interaction with a patient look like now that you're using an AI scribe?
Yeah, so what we see a lot of our clinicians saying is something along the lines of, do you mind if I transcribe this consultation with Lyrebird for the purpose of taking notes for the consult so I can pay better attention to you? And we see from our data over millions of consults that over 99% of patients say yes and are more than willing and kind of don't ask more. But I think a key point there is in terms of what you just asked of what it looks like, we provide a little QR code that every clinician can show to their patient. And that patient, separate to having that conversation with their doctor, can scan that and learn all about how we process their data. That we're fully sovereign in Australia, so we have that transparency with the patient. That's a really key part. But overall, the dynamic we actually have seen, and we've done actually research studies with this, is that the dynamic between the doctor and the patient is a lot more connected and improved as a result of using the scribe. It's quite surprising.
Yeah, I guess when you think about it, because sometimes people might think, well, I don't want to worry my patients, or it's a change in how I deal with things, and I guess that's a genuine concern too. You want to maintain that positive relationship with a patient. You don't want them to feel some distrust, and I know clinicians too often when they point at technology, they go, oh, I'm going to get this thing, or this thing's not doing what it's supposed to. I guess if you can refer to it, as you say, as this thing's going to help me pay more attention to you. You don't have to make a giant deal of it, but at the front, just practicing that kind of flow, and I can see how that would be a positive interaction. That's cool. You got the data around it too.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the key thing is clinicians are used to 1,000 logins, 1,000 different pop-ups. And we designed Lyrebird to be the first piece of software you will use that will make you interact with your computer less, right? And so I think there's a lot of hesitancy from clinicians and also, wanting to put their patients first. But I think yeah, we try to make it that it's the kind of thing that you can kind of put yourself first, and will help your patients as well.
Yeah, on that point around logging into different tools, and I've seen many GPs, when they try their best to use the different tools they've got in front of them, often it might involve, you've got this screen open with this one and this one with that. And some have even set up macros to pull up 15 different screens at the start of the day because they have to jump into these tools. Others go, that's too complicated, I'm just not going to do it. So having an integration into, I guess, the practice management system, which is your core kind of thing, is going to be pretty critical. How much do you think about that whole integration side and how important it is to everything you do?
All the time. I think it's like it's so critical. So we've gotten it with, for example, with best practice to like a one-click launch and kind of single sign-on, which is great. So there's not really any extra passwords or logins that you have to do. But I think that even that flow of setting up the integration for us is how can we make that like completely seamless and one click to actually set up. It's a focus of a lot of work. Yeah.
And so coming back for a second there about the almost like how the AI scribe is the tip of the iceberg. I'd love to learn a little bit more around like what you can do with that. And I guess that's a big chunk of the time suck that happens for a clinician is the taking the notes from a consultation in the first place. Explain to me, like, maybe there's some parts I haven't thought about. Like, what happens after that? Is there subsequent time that is saved after that initial consult, or is that where most of the time saving actually happens?
What we see is that notes and like all the hype around AI scribes is really to do with notes. And that's a fraction of a clinician's workflow. There might be multiple referral letters. There might be a work cover PDF filled in. There might be a consent, like a approval for like a driver's license, which is a PDF. And so at the moment, scribes are kind of solving like this small part of the pie. And what we're doing now is actually like closing off that whole thing. I mean, our mission is to effectively automate any part of a clinician's documentation or entire workflow or job that is not treating their patient and giving active care. So a thing that a doctor is uniquely qualified to do. And so all of that other stuff, which is, analyzing the patient record, right? For example, trawling through just years of medical data, we can use AI to pull out insights from that with kind of one click, like a one-click summary of that patient that's a paragraph long the second they step into your consult, things like that. So from gathering context when you start or before you're seeing them and actually doing that with the patient before, so screening them, then through the consultation, then to everything you might have to fill in afterwards. Think of literally any document that either goes to your record or someone else's. We can fill them in.
If I think about from a clinician's perspective, what's unique outside of other industry, well, many other industries anyway, is that if something goes wrong, there's a lot of responsibility personally on the GP, let's say, or the clinician that's treating a patient, and they become personally liable in some circumstances. And when we think about pre AI scribe days, if say a device was to fail or if there was something else, then often it falls back on the individual, or it might be an insurance issue and all of this. And it's kind of like, well, this broke in this particular device, or that this was an issue. But usually the human patient can kind of pick it up. When I think about if we're crunching so much information, then there's a lot of trust that's then put into the AI to be able to then summarize and not make stuff up and then spit it back and not miss anything. And I know from my own experience of curating my own ChatGPT account that if I kind of throw it some ideas or a suggestion on, like, it's almost like it's not giving me the unbiased perspective. I need to work on my prompts because it's almost like just telling me what I want to hear, as opposed to like a neutral perspective. So I don't want that as a clinician. I wouldn't think I would want that as a clinician. How do you go about ensuring that like giving the clinician trust that what the AI has given them back is legitimate?
That's exactly it. So these are not deterministic calculators. These are predictive text algorithms that are trying to predict the correct next token. So you can't treat them like a medical device because they're not. And so, Peter, the answer to your question is like, how do you do it? Trust the AI. The answer is you don't trust the AI. And so to give you that example with the patient record, you might go give it the information, you might have it return the data, but what you might do is do a second algorithm that's a fact checker, that every piece of text that LLM outputs, you only show the ones to the clinician that you can verbatim match back to the patient record, for example. And therefore, you're not actually showing what the AI's output. You're showing a series of extractions from the patient record that you can link. And so if the clinician clicks on any part of that sentence, it should be able to take them back to a part of the patient record that they can see verbatim and reference. So that's the answer. Don't trust the AI. And I think this is the key thing when you see all these scribes at the moment. I think it's almost with a lack of awareness that medicine is one of very few professions where every single doctor is taking on a personal liability every time they see a patient. And that's a really big deal. And it's like a really big risk that a lot of clinicians are taking. It needs to be taken seriously.
One thing we also see in the AI world is there's a lot of hype at the front end of like, this has potential to save all this time, and you might see some testimonials, like one sentence testimonials from wherever, to say that this is what we've done. It's always great, I find, to actually hear about real world examples, and I'd love to hear any examples you have of clinicians that have given these a bit of a test run and kind of worked with you to kind of continue to iterate and improve. Are there any examples you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think someone, like, shameless to call out, that I think someone that would be happy to be an example is Sean, the good GP, close friend of yours as well. So Sean's used Lyrebird in his practice, and I think he loves Cubico as well, and he compared his Cubico numbers, and I think basically the number of patients per hour he was able to see increased by roughly 25% when he started using Lyrebird. So from a metrics perspective, like patients per hour, and obviously I think like billings and revenue was somewhat correlated with that. But then even anecdotally, he said just like his quality of patient care and his like human to human connections were just so much better after he was using it as well. And he was kind of finishing the day feeling like quite energized, rather than being like, I've got this mountain of paperwork that I have to do. I feel guilty now because I've just seen all the patients. I've deferred it all. I missed dinner. And that dinner one's more of an analogy that you see from just like most clinicians. I think it's quite startling how common that is.
I think that point around, and it's something that we kind of mention almost as a bit of a token point of like, oh, and you get to spend more time, doing things that you like. But I feel like that's a really important deal because, there's a lot of clinicians that spend a lot, like they invest everything into their clinic, particularly as an owner, and there's a lot of time, but often the reason you become a GP, yes, to treat patients and to save lives. But everyone's got their own personal life, and often when you're so driven as a clinician to put patients first, it can be sad to see sometimes that family sometimes comes second.
Yeah, 100%. And I actually had the partner of a specialist reach out to us after they heard, I think, me on a radio, and said, "Hey, my wife is always missing dinner. She's really busy with her practice. I think it was a dermatologist, and I just wanted to know if you guys could help." It sounded like it's really useful, and that was really interesting to hear about the impact on clinicians' loved ones, and very selflessly, I guess, he put us in contact with his wife, and we got her set up. Started using it, and I remember I came back like 4 months later and spoke to him somehow, and I was like, did we ended up getting your wife home in time for dinner? Did that help? He's like, oh yeah, she's just like, we'd have dinner like 4 or 5 nights a week now. And I was like, wow, that's like, I was not expecting that to be a way that Lyrebird, I guess, would kind of like a cool success story from the partners angle. Great referral channel.
Yeah, that's so important. That's such a good story. Hey, what's there's been a lot of building that Lyrebird's done, no doubt, over the years, but there'd be a fair bit on the roadmap too. What can clinicians look forward to seeing?
Yeah, I think like we've talked about the documentation piece. So like very selfishly for you, if you're a doctor, it's like when you have to click into your manual PDFs and fill in the driver's license certificates, your work cover certificates, all these different PDFs. You won't have to do that anymore. Like we're just going to solve that for you. We'll automatically do all of that. We'll fill all of that in. And I think like what's going to be probably really interesting is like how we want to help clinicians be like the best doctor that they can. And so when we think about it, it's most patients might leave with like a piece of paper, and no shade on doctors. I think everyone's really busy, but there's no clear great system of like giving patients the information they kind of need. And it's like, they walk out. I find this myself, maybe I'm like not a very good listener, but I kind of walk out, I'm like, what just happened again? Did I miss all this stuff? And so I think like we will be building also the tools to like give your patient an incredible experience after they leave the consult, and like help then be managed the way that you would ideally want to manage them if you had infinite time, so that like the health outcomes actually improve materially as well.
That concept of, what would you do if you had infinite time, or like if you could wave the magic wand? I think that with those right innovators, they can really sit and listen to clinicians and understand those problems. And I think some of the barriers we've had in the past of like, well, that's technically not possible. I think that, with the right development, we can do that. So that's super exciting to hear those kind of things are on the card. So if you were to sum it up, Kai, what are the 3 things that a clinician needs to look for when searching for an AI scribe?
I think first of all, like I said, is data sovereignty. That's really important. I think like even above price, like what price would you put on the consultation audio between you and your patients for the last 6 months? I think this is an incredibly valuable thing. And so data sovereignty is number one. I'd say second would be integrations. That's a really good sign of trust from the EMR that you use and other EMRs in the space, and also of what that scribe's going to be able to do in the future. Third, I think would be like incredibly unique to you is how does it sound and how well does it like imitate the voice that you want to represent you? What this scribe's writing is going to be how you're going to be kind of appearing externally to other clinicians and the world, and like the almost intangible like tone, nuance of like the style that it writes in, making sure that that's something that you feel is like a really great representation of yourself is super important.
Some great snappy takeaways for the clinicians that are out there exploring the options, and we'll make sure that the details for Lyrebird are in the show notes of this episode, and of course you can find them on our website as well, and some previous content we've done too. So Kai, I really appreciate you making the time for this conversation. Looking forward to doing it again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pete.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Health Tech. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. For more information and resources about healthcare innovation, visit talkinghealthtech.com.